You know, there's something quite peculiar about the way we move through our days, surrounded by people who seem entirely absorbed in a world you can barely recognize anymore. It's as if you've stumbled upon a secret that changes everything, yet when you look around, everyone else appears to be living in a completely different reality. They're worried about things that suddenly seem trivial to you. They're chasing after shadows. And you find yourself standing there, watching this great human drama unfold, wondering if you've gone mad or if you've simply woken up. This isn't the comfortable feeling of knowing something others don't. No, this is far more unsettling. It's the strange vertigo of seeing through the very fabric of what everyone around you takes to be solid and real. You're watching people build elaborate castles out of thoughts, defend territories that exist only in their minds, suffer over stories they're telling themselves about who they are and what they need to be happy. And the most peculiar thing of all is that you used to be one of them. You were completely convinced by the same game. What happens when you begin to see what others can't? What happens when the veil becomes so thin that you can't quite pretend anymore that the emperor is wearing clothes? The strange thing about this kind of seeing is that it doesn't come from accumulating more knowledge or developing a superior intellect. In fact, it's almost the opposite. It's more like a forgetting than a learning, a subtraction rather than an addition. All those years you spent building up your understanding of how the world works, all those carefully constructed beliefs about who you are and how life should unfold, they start to fall away like scales from your eyes. And what you're left with is something far simpler and far more radical than anything you believed before. The Buddhist traditions have a term for this, though we needn't get caught up in terminology. They speak of seeing through the illusion of the separate self, recognizing that what you took to be you is actually a construction, a story, a habit of thought that has convinced itself of its own reality. But here's where it gets interesting. When you truly see this, not just as an intellectual concept but as a lived reality, you don't see other people as fools for still being caught in the illusion. You see them as yourself, playing the same game you were playing just moments ago in the grand scheme of things. You see the whole human comedy with a kind of tender recognition. It's like watching fish frantically searching for water while they're swimming in it. They're looking everywhere, desperately seeking the very thing they're already immersed in, never realizing that they're looking with water, through water, as water. And you can't exactly pull a fish aside and explain this in a way that makes sense within their framework of understanding, because their entire framework is predicated on the separation between themselves and what they're seeking. This is the peculiar isolation of seeing. You recognize that everyone is already complete, already whole, already the very thing they're desperately trying to become. But they're convinced they're not. They're convinced they need to achieve something, attain something, become someone different than who they are right now. And this conviction is so strong, so pervasive, so deeply embedded in the structure of how we've been taught to think, that pointing it out can feel like speaking a foreign language. Now, here's a question worth sitting with. When you see what others can't see, when you recognize the game that everyone is playing, including the game of I'm the one who sees through the game, what do you do with that seeing? Do you retreat into silence? Do you try to shake people awake? Do you play along while knowing it's a game? Perhaps you've noticed this in your own experience. There's something profoundly universal about this sense of awakening to a reality that seems invisible to those around you. It can feel like the loneliest thing in the world and simultaneously like the most intimate connection with everything that exists. I'd be curious to know how this has shown up in your life. What have you seen that you can't unsee? And how has that changed the way you move through the world? Drop your reflections in the comments below. There's something valuable in sharing these recognitions with others who might be experiencing the same strange shift in perception. Let's look at how this seeing actually manifests in everyday life, because it's not some abstract spiritual attainment. It's happening right now, in the midst of ordinary experience. You're at a party, let's say, and everyone is performing. Not performing in a negative sense, but performing in the sense that they're all playing roles, maintaining images, trying to be seen in a certain way. And you can see it so clearly. You can see how exhausting it is, this constant self-monitoring, this endless internal commentary about whether you're coming across well, whether people like you, whether you're saying the right things. But here's what's fascinating. You're also performing. The you who sees through the performance is itself a kind of performance. The one who knows, the one who's awake, the one who sees what others can't, this too is a role, a character in the great drama. And when you see that, when you see through the seer, something quite extraordinary happens. The whole thing becomes playful. It becomes light. Because you realize that there's no one who needs to escape from the game and no game to escape from. The seeing itself is part of the dance. The awakening is happening within the dream. And suddenly the question isn't how do I get out, but rather how completely can I participate while knowing it's a dance. This is where it gets counterintuitive. You'd think that seeing through the illusions of everyday life would make you detached, distant, perhaps even cynical. But something else happens entirely. You become more present, not less. More engaged, not less. Because you're no longer protecting an image of yourself that could be damaged. You're no longer defending a territory that never existed in the first place. You're free to respond to what's actually happening rather than to your thoughts about what's happening. Watch a child at play. They're completely absorbed in their game of make-believe, and yet they know it's make-believe. They haven't forgotten that they're not actually a superhero or a princess or a dragon. But they're fully committed to the game. That's the paradox. Total engagement, zero attachment. Complete sincerity in the midst of recognized illusion. Now, we need to talk about what happens in the space between seeing and the old patterns of thinking. Because this is where most people get stuck. You have a glimpse, a moment of clarity where you see through the whole construction. And then, almost immediately, the mind starts trying to turn that glimpse into a new position, a new identity. I'm the one who's awake now. I'm the one who sees clearly. Everyone else is still asleep, but I've got it figured out. And just like that, you're back in the game. You've simply traded one illusion for another, one role for another. The role of the awakened one is just as much a construction as the role of the seeker or the sufferer or the successful person. It's all the same fundamental pattern. The belief in a separate self that could be improved, elevated, enlightened. This is what the Zen traditions point to with all those paradoxical stories and nonsensical koans. They're trying to prevent you from turning insight into accomplishment. Because the moment you think you've got it, you've lost it. The moment you try to possess the insight, it slips through your fingers like water. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the whole attempt is based on a misunderstanding. There's no one to possess the insight. The insight is the recognition that there's no one there in the first place. Think about it this way. When you're watching a movie, you can get completely absorbed in the story. You identify with the characters, feel their emotions, forget that you're sitting in a theater watching light projected onto a screen. But then, perhaps, you hear someone cough, or you notice the edge of the frame, and suddenly you remember. Oh right, I'm watching a movie. For a moment, the spell is broken. You see the mechanism behind the magic. But notice what happens next. If it's a good movie, you get drawn back in. You return to the story. And here's the key. You can enjoy the movie more fully now because you're not as tightly gripped by the need for a particular outcome. You know it's a movie. You know it's going to end. You know none of it is real in the way you were taking it to be real. And yet you can still be moved by it, still appreciate the craft of it, still participate in the emotional journey. In fact, you might argue that this is the only way to really enjoy a movie, when you're not desperately attached to controlling how it unfolds. Here's where we enter truly strange territory. The seeing we're talking about, this capacity to recognize the constructed nature of experience, it doesn't lead anywhere. It's not taking you from point A to point B. It's not a journey in the conventional sense at all. It's more like waking up from a dream and realizing you were never in the place you thought you were. And this can be terrifying. Because if there's nowhere to go and nothing to achieve, what then? If all the seeking, all the striving, all the effort to become someone better, someone more enlightened, someone more awake, if all of that is just another loop in the game, then what's the point? This is the existential vertigo that many people experience when they start to see clearly. Everything they were using to orient themselves, all their reference points, all their goals and aspirations, they start to dissolve. And in that dissolution, there's a moment of panic. The mind scrambles for something to hold on to. Give me a practice. Give me a method. Give me something I can do to make this feeling go away. But the feeling isn't the problem. The disorientation isn't what needs to be fixed. It's actually the threshold. It's the space where transformation becomes possible, not because you're trying to transform yourself, but because you're letting go of the one who needs transforming. The Advaita teachers call this neti-neti, not this, not that. You keep removing every false identification until there's nothing left to remove. And what remains isn't a thing at all. It's the aware emptiness that was there all along, the consciousness that's witnessing everything, including the idea of consciousness itself. It's what you are before you think about what you are. It's the space in which all experience arises, including the experience of being a separate person who sees what others can't see. If this all sounds too abstract, too philosophical, consider what it's like to actually live from this recognition. You're still you, in the conventional sense. You still have preferences, personality traits, habits, ways of being. But you're no longer taking them so seriously. You're no longer defending them as if your existence depended on maintaining a particular self-image. You can be wrong without it threatening your identity. You can fail without it meaning something fundamental about who you are. You can be criticized without needing to protect yourself or justify yourself or prove that the criticism isn't valid. This is the freedom that comes from seeing. Not freedom from experience, but freedom within experience. Not transcendence of the human condition, but complete embrace of it without the added suffering of resistance. Now, if you're finding resonance with what we're exploring here, I want to acknowledge something. This journey of awakening, this process of seeing through the veils of conditioning and false identification, it can feel isolating. But it doesn't have to be. There's something powerful about engaging with a community of people who are asking the same deep questions, experiencing the same shifts in perception, navigating the same challenges of living from a place of greater clarity. That's why I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Not as a guru-follower relationship, because that would be just another form of the game we're seeing through. But as fellow travelers, comparing notes, sharing insights, exploring these territories of consciousness together. In the upcoming videos, we'll continue to dive into different dimensions of this awakening process, looking at specific challenges, specific breakthroughs, specific ways that seeing transforms how we relate to work, to relationships, to suffering, to joy. Consider joining this exploration. The conversation continues, and your perspective, your questions, your insights add to the collective understanding. Let's talk about what happens when you try to share what you're seeing with others. This is where the paradox becomes really apparent. On one hand, you recognize that everyone is already what they're seeking, already whole, already complete. On the other hand, you see them suffering needlessly, caught in patterns of thought that create their pain. And there's a natural compassion that arises. A desire to help, to point out what seems so obvious to you now. But here's what you discover very quickly. You can't give the seeing to someone else. You can point, you can create circumstances where recognition might occur, but you can't force an awakening. And in fact, the more you try to convince someone of what you're seeing, the more you reinforce the very dynamic you're trying to dissolve. You create a separation between the one who knows and the one who doesn't know. You establish yourself as the authority, the one who has something that others lack. This is the strange predicament of the teacher, the guide, the person who sees clearly. The moment you position yourself as having something to offer, you've created the very duality you're pointing beyond. And yet, if you say nothing, if you keep silent, you're potentially withholding something that could alleviate suffering. So what do? You dance. You play. You speak when it seems helpful, and you're silent when that seems more appropriate. But most importantly, you don't take yourself too seriously as the one who knows. Because the deepest knowing is the recognition that there's no one who knows. There's just knowing itself, happening. Awareness being aware of itself through this particular human form. Think of it like this. The sun doesn't try to shine. It doesn't strategize about how to spread its light. Shining is what it does. It's its nature. And if there are clouds blocking the light, the sun doesn't take it personally. It doesn't think, those clouds are preventing me from fulfilling my purpose. It just continues being what it is, and when the clouds part, the light naturally shines through. When you see clearly, you become like that. You don't force your seeing on anyone. You don't make your clarity into a weapon or a badge of superiority. You simply be what you are, and sometimes that resonates with others, creates an opening, allows light to shine through the clouds of their conditioning. And sometimes it doesn't. And that's okay too. Here's something that needs to be said, because it's where a lot of people go wrong. Seeing what others can't see doesn't make you special. It doesn't elevate you above the human condition. It doesn't exempt you from pain or confusion or moments of forgetting. If anything, it makes you more human, not less. More present to the full spectrum of experience. More available to both joy and sorrow without needing one and rejecting the other. The spiritual ego is perhaps the most subtle and dangerous trap on this path. It's the part of you that wants to be the awakened one, the enlightened one, the one who has transcended. And it's incredibly clever. It can take the language of non-duality and turn it into a new form of separation. I'm no one. I'm everything. I'm beyond the ego. All while reinforcing the very ego structure it claims to have transcended. The only way through this is to keep seeing. Keep noticing when you're making yourself special. Keep catching yourself in the act of creating a superior position. Not with judgment, not with self-condemnation, but with the same gentle recognition you'd bring to watching clouds pass across the sky. Ah, there's that pattern again. There's the ego trying to make itself into the hero of the story. And in the seeing of it, it loses its grip. This is the great gift of genuine insight. It's self-correcting. The more clearly you see, the more you recognize when you're caught in illusion. Not because you've become perfect or infallible, but because you've become familiar with the texture of truth and the texture of delusion. You know what it feels like when you're identified with thought versus when you're resting as awareness itself. You know the difference between being lost in the story and watching the story unfold. What does it actually look like to live from this seeing in the midst of ordinary life? Because that's the real question, isn't it? Not the theoretical understanding, not the conceptual framework, but the lived reality. How do you pay your bills, maintain relationships, navigate conflicts, make decisions, when you've seen through the fundamental assumption that there's a separate self who needs to protect its interests? Here's what's remarkable. Life becomes simpler, but not easier. Clearer, but not necessarily more comfortable. You still feel anger, but you're not as consumed by it. You still feel fear, but you're not as dominated by it. You still make mistakes, but you don't turn them into evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. You still experience pain, but you're not creating an additional layer of suffering through resistance to the pain. It's like the difference between being caught in a wave and swimming with the ocean. When you're caught in a wave, you panic. You fight against the water. You thrash and struggle and exhaust yourself trying to control something that can't be controlled. But when you recognize yourself as the ocean, you can let the waves move through you. You're not separate from the movement. You are the movement. And in that recognition, there's a fundamental relaxation, even in the midst of turbulence. This doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you stop taking action or making choices. Action continues, choice continues, but it's no longer coming from a place of fear and grasping. It's coming from a deeper intelligence, a spontaneous responsiveness to what the moment is calling for. You're not following a script anymore. You're not trying to maintain a character. You're simply responding to life as it presents itself, moment by moment. And here's something interesting. When you're no longer defending a position, when you're no longer trying to prove something or protect something, you become much more effective in the world. Not because you're trying to be effective, but because you're not getting in your own way anymore. You're not sabotaging yourself with doubt and second-guessing. You're not exhausting yourself with internal conflict. You're just doing what needs to be done, without the added weight of a self-concept that could be threatened by failure. Now we come to perhaps the deepest paradox of all. The seeing that we're talking about, this recognition of what you truly are beneath all the conditioning and thought, it can't coexist with the one who's trying to attain it. It's like the eye trying to see itself. You can't make it happen because you are already it. The one who's trying to wake up is the dream. The one who's trying to see clearly is the obstruction to clear seeing. This is why all the great spiritual traditions eventually point to the same truth in different language. Be still and know. The kingdom of heaven is within you. You are that. Original nature is Buddha nature. They're all pointing to the recognition that what you're seeking is what's doing the seeking. The awareness you're trying to achieve is the awareness that's already aware of your trying. But the mind doesn't like this. The mind wants a path, a method, a sequence of steps that will lead from here to there. And there's nothing wrong with practices, with meditation, with inquiry, with study. They can be helpful. They can create the conditions where recognition might occur. But they can also become another way of postponing the recognition, another way of maintaining the illusion that you're not already what you're trying to become. So there's a delicate balance required. You have to take the journey seriously enough to actually engage with it, but lightly enough that you don't turn it into another achievement project. You have to practice as if it matters, while knowing that ultimately there's nothing to achieve. You have to seek while understanding that seeking itself is the obstacle. This is the razor's edge. Too much effort and you create tension, resistance, a sense of inadequacy. Too much relaxation and you fall into complacency, spiritual laziness, using the concept of nothing to do as an excuse for avoidance. The middle way isn't a compromise between these extremes. It's a completely different orientation altogether. It's engaging fully with life while holding everything lightly. It's being utterly sincere and simultaneously playful. When you see what others can't see, you're not actually seeing something different than what they're seeing. You're seeing the same reality but without the filters, without the interpretations, without the constant mental commentary that turns direct experience into a story about experience. Everyone is looking at the same world. But most people are looking through their thoughts, their beliefs, their conditioning. They're seeing their interpretation of reality rather than reality itself. And here's the fascinating thing. You can't actually separate reality from your perception of reality. There's no objective world out there that you're finally seeing correctly. What you're recognizing is that reality is empty of inherent existence. It's fluid, dynamic, completely dependent on the perspective from which it's perceived. And yet within that emptiness, within that fluidity, everything is perfectly itself. The flower is completely a flower. The mountain is totally a mountain. Your anger is fully anger. Your joy is absolutely joy. This is what the Zen teachers mean when they say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Nothing changes and everything changes. The activities are the same, the experiences are the same, but your relationship to them is completely transformed. You're no longer taking your life personally. You're no longer making everything mean something about you. You're just here, now, fully present to what is, without the constant need to judge it, fix it, or escape from it. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to escape from your life, when you stop resisting what is, that's when real transformation becomes possible. Not the transformation of becoming someone better, but the transformation of recognizing you were never the limited person you thought you were in the first place. You've always been the vast awareness within which all experience arises. You've always been the ocean pretending to be a wave, forgetting your true nature in the intensity of the game. So what do you do with this seeing? How do you live in a world where most people are still caught in the dream while you're increasingly awake to the dreamlike nature of it all? The answer is both simple and complex. You be present. You be kind. You be authentic. Not because you're trying to be a good person or because you're following a moral code, but because these qualities naturally arise when you're not defending a separate self. Presence arises because you're not lost in thoughts about the past or future. Kindness arises because you recognize yourself in everyone you meet. Authenticity arises because you're not maintaining an image or playing a role. You're simply being what you are, moment by moment, without the added layer of pretense. And yes, there will still be moments of forgetting. Moments when you get caught in the dream again, when you identify with thought, when you believe the story of separation. But increasingly, you recognize these moments for what they are. Not failures, not steps backward, but simply the natural movement of consciousness playing all its possibilities. The wave rising and falling. The breath coming and going. Awareness forgetting and remembering itself in an eternal dance. This is the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from the human experience, but freedom within it. Not transcendence of limitation, but complete acceptance of limitation as part of the infinite play. You get to be fully human and fully divine at the same time. You get to be nobody special in the entire universe simultaneously. You get to live in the world while knowing you're not of it, engaged in the drama while seeing through it. And here, at the end, we come full circle to where we began. You're still you, still here, still navigating a world that often seems to be operating on completely different assumptions than your direct experience. But something fundamental has shifted. You're no longer troubled by the gap between what you see and what others see. You understand that everyone is exactly where they need to be, seeing exactly what they're ready to see. You understand that the awakening isn't your achievement, isn't something you did, but rather something that happened through you, as you, despite you. When you see what others can't see, everything changes and nothing changes. The world is still the world. Suffering still arises. Joy still arises. Confusion still arises. But you're no longer fighting any of it. You're no longer trying to fix yourself or save yourself or transcend yourself. You're simply here, aware, present, completely ordinary and utterly extraordinary at the same time. This is the great secret hiding in plain sight. What you are has never been hidden. It's been here all along, closer than your breath, more intimate than your thoughts, more immediate than this present moment. You are the seeing itself. You are the awareness within which all seeing and not seeing appears. You are what you've been looking for, disguised as the one who's looking. And when that recognition stabilizes, when it becomes your lived reality rather than just a passing insight, you discover the most paradoxical truth of all. The isolation of seeing what others can't see transforms into the deepest intimacy with everything that exists. Because in recognizing what you truly are, you recognize what everything truly is. One awareness, one consciousness, playing all the parts, watching itself through infinite eyes, knowing itself in endless forms. You've always been home. You've always been whole. You've always been free. The only thing that's changed is that now you know it.